Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Welcome to Popcorn Psychology. Today we are going to be discussing Jordan Peele's Us. I'm very excited for this episode. We're going to be joined by a very special guest, the Seers of Ardham, and they have a wealth of expertise and knowledge as well as being the purveyors of their own show. So we're going to take a second here and let everybody who's guesting with us introduce themselves. Maybe let's go ahead and start with Dr. Scott Jordan.
I'm Scott Jordan, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University, a.k.a. Zombie Scotty, and delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. Let's just kind of make our way around. So, Cianna, would you like to go next?
Yeah, my name is Cianna Greaves. I am a podcast and broadcast radio producer at a WYPR in Baltimore, and I am currently based out of Chicago, Illinois.
Welcome. All right, Leandra.
Yeah, I'm Leandra Parris. I'm an assistant professor of school psychology at William & Mary. I specialize in childhood trauma and crisis intervention.
Good. You and me are going to have a lot to talk about. All right, Dr. Carpenter.
Yes, hello, I'm Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm coming to you out of Chicago, Illinois.
Welcome, sir. And our last guest.
Dr. Byron Craig. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Communication at Illinois State University, and my area is rhetoric and public culture and race and trauma.
Oh, great.
All right. Welcome. So my name is Ben Stover. I am a trauma therapist primarily. I work with first responders as well as working in private practice. I have been practicing for coming up on 11 years now and am very excited to be here today. And my co-hosts will go ahead and introduce themselves next year.
I can go. So I'm Brittany Brownfield. I am specialized in child therapy. I have worked in several intensive partial hospital programs. I currently work in one, and I work primarily with kids and teenagers and their families who have gone through substantial either mental health diagnoses and or trauma and relational issues.
And I'm Hannah Espinoza. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I currently have my own practice.
You do?
Feels super fucking weird to say. And I work with anybody who's 10 and up. I work with families, couples, individuals, kids, teenagers, kind of just with anybody. So.
All right. Well, we're excited to kind of start the show today. So what we're going to do is start off with a rundown of kind of what this film has. And Brittany, you're usually our expert at this. Would you like to start on that?
In terms of the plot of the movie?
The plot of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So just kind of quickly. So Us is about a young girl, Adelaide, who when she is young, well, we assume that when she's young, she wanders off the boardwalk from her parents and she finds a little girl who looks just like her and is kind of stays with that experience, kind of stays with her whole growing up. When she's an adult, her and her grown family, now her husband and 2 kids, go back to the seaside area where this happened to her as a kid. She starts to either consciously remember what happened as a kid or just is coming up for her. And then her and her family get home invaded by a family who looks just like them. They're wearing red jumpsuits. They're very odd. They can't really communicate. And then over the course of the movie, it's pretty much a horror movie in that they're running from being chased by these others, their tethers. Eventually, they sort of defeat their tethers, and you realize that, spoiler alert, Adelaide is actually the little girl that was underground. And she switched places with the actual abyss above ground version of herself as a little kid. And so that's the twist. And so it kind of brings up these ideas of basically like post-traumatic stress disorder, which we kind of see through her behavior in the beginning of the movie. We also will talk about fight or flight, your shadow self, nature versus nurture, the cultural commentary of experimentation, because we find out that all the tethers are part of a abandoned experiment by the U.S. government. And we'll also, just kind of talk about all the cultural kind of fallout of that situation.
All right. Well done. So let's start out with, we have quite a few people here that have mentioned that they have a background in either studying or treating trauma. So what I'm going to do is kind of run through the criteria of PTSD. And while I'm pulling that up, does anyone disagree with the idea that we see at least an argument for PTSD in this movie?
No.
I think, like a lot of the movies we talk about, if you break down the actual cinematic aspects, you could argue that she doesn't so much have PTSD as so much as that she is reacting to the anxiety of being found out, because we find out that she is the switch of herself. But I think she exemplifies a lot of the standard symptoms of PTSD, and as an adult.
Well,
yes.
I have a question. What about Red, though? I mean, because you've got the girl that's pulled into the world of the Tethers, right? You know, so they're not the same person; they're different. And I think that you would look at Adelaide and Adelaide's relation to trauma in a way that's very different than you would look at Red's, right? Because for Red, she was up top, and then she's brought down.
Yes.
Right. Red is living ongoing trauma.
That's what I was going to say.
Life.
Yeah. Red is experiencing continual. Yeah.
And can I just add that the way I experienced the movie the second time, I think PTSD can be applied to the individual, the group, and the culture, right? I think the film is kind of a poetic exploration of the trauma we individually, group-wise, and collectively have created for each other. So I think you could apply those PTSD criteria to the culture exhibited in the movie as well.
I think that's an excellent point. All right, so when we talk about PTSD, I realize not all our listeners have a psychology background, so I'll kind of run down these real quick. Is that one of the things that we want to look for when we talk about trauma, and in order to evaluate an individual for a PTSD diagnosis, we're looking for exposure to a traumatic stressor, and that stressor can be direct, indirect, or repeated. And what indirect means is that it doesn't have to happen directly to you. It can happen to someone you know. It can have happened, which is an interesting change I thought in DSM-5, was to see that it can happen to someone who has the same job as you and doesn't have to have been even known to you. But if you are working in the same job, and I see this with first responders a lot, they feel it if any else or any other first responder encounters a traumatic event, it affects the whole community. And I think that ties into what Scott was saying. But we also talk about, as far as symptoms, we get recurrent, involuntary, intrusive memories. These can include traumatic nightmares, flashbacks, intensive or prolonged distress. We see symptoms of avoidance, avoiding places, conversations, people, or experiences that even remotely remind them of an experience, any trauma-related thoughts or feelings, and external reminders. And we certainly see avoidance exhibited by Adelaide. Negative alterations in thinking and mood, inability to recall key events, persistent negative beliefs and expectations, persistent negative fears, horror, anger, guilt, shame, diminished interest in activities, or constricted affect. We can also see alterations in arousal and reactivity, including irritable and aggressive behaviors, self-destruction, hypervigilance, problems in concentration, and sleep disturbance. We can also see functional and social or occupational impairment, and these symptoms need to last longer than 30 days. It's an important distinction to mention that there is a diagnosis that can exist for someone who has encountered trauma for days 0 to 30, which is an acute stress reaction, which does not mean that they have or will develop the criteria for PTSD, and they may not hold that diagnosis. It's normal for people to have a reaction to a traumatic event for about 30 days afterwards. And the last criteria is we need a significant disruption in normal life pursuits, and none of this can be caused or better explained by another disorder or medical condition. There's your rundown of PTSD.
And they use that diagnosis. They say it outright in the movie when Adelaide emerges and gets taken home by her new parents, I guess. They do, there is what I assume to be a child therapist who tells the parents point blank that she has PTSD, and that's also why she has what I assume is they're considering selective mutism, which is when you don't talk, usually in in this situation, in reaction to a traumatic experience. But kind of what you were saying, Ben, it was between, I don't know if they had this in the 80s in terms of like the acute diagnosis. So I don't know if they would have counted that when she went to see a child psychiatrist right after the situation.
Also, we don't know the time frame of how long it took for them to get her in, which makes diagnosing in film always very difficult, and why we just offer impressions as opposed to full diagnosis, right? Because unless we get clear information, it's really hard because there's so many ifs, stands, buts listed in our profession. So these are the things that I saw, like, that stuck out to me, is that and everybody can chime in here too, is as we kind of like evaluate that, I saw a lot of avoidance symptoms, especially the closer we got to the beach, emerge in Adelaide. As far as avoidance, what we've seen, like, she didn't want to go near the Mirror House. She didn't want to go to the beach. She became a little bit distressed when her husband encouraged her to go to the beach, and we're going to go to Santa Cruz. We're going to go to this park and we're going to have a good time. And you see her distress level start to rise.
It makes me wonder if this is the first time they've gone there as an adult with kids. They don't make any mention of that, but it seems like, I don't know, like her reaction, like they would know this is a place that she's not comfortable. It's interesting that she's having this reaction this time around. It seems pretty pronounced. Like her husband is definitely noting, and he's kind of like, what's up with you?
And I thought that it was interesting that we find out that she had never said anything to him about it. And again, not necessarily that like you have to share all of your shit as soon as you get married to somebody, but it is interesting that they went to this place that they've probably have been, I mean, not to Santa Cruz, 'cause I know that that's like further away from where the house is, but they've definitely been up there, I would imagine, more than one time, because the kids seem to like know where to go. Like there isn't any like, this is where your room is kind of stuff. So I feel like they've been there, and she just never said anything about it before. And my guess is she probably hasn't said anything because we know that she's switched. So like, we know that she probably wouldn't want to talk about it. Like that's the movie part of it. But at the same time, I think also just knowing how they can have an impact on a partner because like if she would have told him about this, he probably never would have suggested that they go there, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think one of the, like, it's like really, really small, but he says something like, this is the first time we've been here since grandma died. So I feel like that's her childhood home. So this is their first time going. And I think that if her mom were living there and they were visiting, she would probably be an ally and be like, no, we don't need to go there. Like she knows why she doesn't want to go. So I feel like this is the first time that she's going without that person who was so worried and like took care of her. Although she does like make that comment, like, I want my daughter back. So I'm kind of wondering if the mom kind of knew something was up, but I felt like some of it was not having the mom there on top of going and all that hypervigilance around like Ben said, like the children being there and like knowing what's going to happen if he veers off too far, like just having another awareness. But that was kind of my take, is that this is the first time she's been there without that ally to kind of like who already knows.
Yeah, she's so overstimulated. Like the hypervigilant quality, like it's done very well in the movie. When they're at the beach, like the birds and like all these like rapid edit shots that JordanPeel makes you feel the kind of edginess that she's feeling. Like she can't really hear what Elizabeth Moss's character, I think Kitty, is saying to her. She's always at red alert. Her eyes are moving everywhere to sort of assess her kid. Where is he going? She's assessing threats all the time. When that guy rises up from the sand, she's like panicking. She doesn't want to drink, so she's trying to stay like on her guard, which could also just be her personality. But it's definitely, she's like, it's growing, like the dread and the anxiety. It's like she's trying to keep a cap on it. She's trying to be quote unquote normal, and it's hitting its breaking point, almost a point. And I'd be interested in what you guys think. Like when she's talking to her husband in her bedroom. She almost sounds like if I was just coming at her, if this wasn't a movie, this was more quote unquote real life. She almost seems like she's starting to have like a bit of a psychotic break because of her anxiety. She sounds so like paranoid and a little delusional. Like she's coming for me. There's a little girl. I can feel her. The little girl is coming. She's coming. She's on her way. And her husband, you can see by his reaction, this is so atypical from her presentation that he almost doesn't know what to do with her. And he's unfortunately using humor to deflect his discomfort. But it was interesting to see. It did feel like what we would call a psychotic break, which is, this is a very casual definition, but it basically is what it sounds like when all of a sudden someone with a fairly normal presentation is exhibiting signs of psychosis. So like paranoia, hearing things, seeing things, all the kind of abnormal behavior that's used a lot in movies, but is not as typical in standard living.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Absolutely.
So one of the things about and just want to talk about this from like maybe this perspective of trauma that I don't study, but for me, this film is also something that is about this notion of something being forgotten or overwritten. Right? Because for me, the film kind of also represents this larger issue of American culture, right? How we forget history, how we override a history, right? And so I wonder how that plays into this theme of like the psychotic break that you're talking about, right? That you're talking about, Brittany. How can we talk about it in those terms also, right? So if her character is starting to have those breaks, is part of that because of this theme of this forgetting or trying to override this history, right? And how, I just wonder how that plays into this notion of trauma that you all are talking about.
I think that's a great observation. I was kind of perceiving, recognizing in myself watching it is, it does seem like she is uncovering memories. She picks up that bunny. She sees the other version of herself in the mirror. It seems like the environment is bringing up a lot of things that she might either consciously or unconsciously have, like you were saying, like written over or kind of refused. Which is kind of multi-layered here because it's not just something really scary happened to me when I was a kid and I can't deal with it. So I have to put it in a corner in my brain until I forget about it, which is also something we do when we're really young, whether we mean to or not. How much do you actually remember from when you're a kid, especially at like 6 or 7, when this happened to her, I assume. And then I think part of it too is she had to acclimate. And when we acclimate, we sometimes have to shove down parts of ourselves really far down in order to survive. And for her as a little kid coming up to the above the world, she really had to acclimate quick. And it's amazing how quote unquote functioning she is as an adult. When we're little, we're very resilient. We can adapt surprisingly well. And I think for her, it would be interesting in talking to her after the fact, if she's a real person, of how much were these recovered memories part of her trauma work and how much of it was things that she had been consciously working to suppress since she was that little. And when you're that little, it's hard to know what that line is in terms of what am I doing consciously versus unconsciously, because you're just trying to get through and you're not as sophisticated in your thinking yet. So sometimes you're just doing, you're surviving.
One thing that struck me though, and this kind of comes from a little bit different direction, is that I felt like a lot of what was happening was her managing her guilt. So it's not, she didn't just come up from the world below. She came up and she took somebody and dragged them down and put them in that place, right? And then she assumed that identity. Right. So we literally are seeing the world from the perspective of the monster. Right. But who then becomes something else, who is then put into this environment where she's nurtured into being something else. The other thing that's interesting about it to me is that this is happening when she's a child, and we all and most cultures acknowledge that as a child, your morality hasn't yet formed. Right. So for me, the issue is, I kind of look at it as as she's at this age where there is no morality. She's not thinking I'm being a bad person. She's thinking, I want what's up there. Right. And then she just does what she has to do to get it. And then she's raised within this nurturing environment that allows her to become, by her own by the cultural definition around her, a good person, right? And I don't necessarily think that she had to forget that. I think that I read it in terms of her, as she becomes a good person, she has to, as part of that growth process, recognize that she was pretty shitty.
I agree. Watching second, I'm sorry.
And then just fast forward to when the tethered show up. That's not, I don't think I think that's also her confronting her entire worldview just disintegrating, and not in a metaphorical or necessarily in a psychological sense, literally, right? Because the person she has victimized has literally come to her and looked her in the eye.
Which is, I guess, this is all fascinating observation. It's so important to be able to consider that when we're analyzing this character, because you don't know that till the end of the film. And you see, when you deal with people who have done something in their childhood, there's a lot of work that must be done around exactly what you're talking about, of learning to forgive yourself for the things you did in your past before you knew that they were wrong, but that you know are wrong now. And having to adjust to that. And one of the things that I see with clients with that a lot is that there is tremendous difficulty in not applying the values and morality that you have developed now and applying that to the childhood version of yourself. So that people think that the information you have now as an adult should have applied to the version of a child that you were then. When, we see this child who's maybe 7 or 8 years old, like you said, morality is not developed yet. She saw, I want it, and she took her shot. And that cost the life of another person, her shadow. It cost that person's life. And we see her, I think, trying to avoid that, and probably did do a lot of work in therapy to get past that. Mm-hmm. And especially when she comes face to face.
Piggybacking off of what Stanford was saying, I mean, the second time around, watching this the second time, I mean, we're definitely dealing with issues of trauma during the first watch, but there's a lot of guilt. This woman is definitely dealing with the literal imposter syndrome. She has stolen a life.
She has.
There is understanding morality as a child, but I think she was fully aware of what she did. She kidnapped a child, and there was something, her actions were very, very deliberate. She handcuffed a little girl to a bed, swapped her clothes, even though the clothes were identical. I found that very, very interesting.
Yeah,
were there sense? I mean, Red is obviously, not Red. Adelaide is obviously incredibly aware and clearly more intelligent than any of the other tethered. I mean, it could be something of, the smell of the clothes being different. I mean, she was just very, very calculating. And it was incredibly creepy watching
yes.
it the second time. I was way more scared, way more creeped out the second time, because you see how deliberate her actions are. And when the family shows up, halfway through the movie, it was a reckoning, really, more than anything. Like Stanford said, I was terrified for her, because her anxiety was really wrought after having, like Stanford said, having to look a victim in the eye.
Yeah, I think I think those themes that played out at the individual level in terms of guilt and forgetting and such, I think for me that theme played out at multiple levels as Byron was getting to, in the sense of, if we're going to be someone, there are other possibilities we necessarily suppress. So not only is it the individual deciding who they're going to be, working through who they could have been, there's the fantastic scene where you have the father of an upwardly mobile African-American family have these people at the end of his driveway. And the first thing he does is he comes out and he tries to talk to them and he tries to explain to them why they shouldn't be on his property, which is a traditional landowner value. And that doesn't work. And so he goes in the house and he gets a baseball bat. And if you watch what he says when he comes out, he then starts to speak in a much more rap-oriented voice. And what you see him doing is straddling these identities himself, right? Who am I going to be? And the white couple also supplies this foil for who am I going to be, right? I mean, there's nothing that we end up respecting about the white couple throughout the entire flick, right? But their job is to show us what the curse of living a life of upper middle class white America is like when you do all the things like forget everything that it took for you to be able to live in that house, in that neighborhood, et cetera. So I ended up experiencing the movie very poetically in terms of this struggle between suppression and identity playing out at the level of the individual, at the level of the group, and at the level of the culture with the whole Hands Across America thing. That's why I think it's such a stunning achievement, because I'll focus on different levels every time I watch it.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think those are fascinating points. I really appreciate that. I only got the chance to see the movie once so far, and I'm looking forward to watching it again and being able to digest all of the layers Jordan Peele works into his work.
Yeah, it's a real mindfuck the second time around. So much empathy for Red the second time around. I mean, Adelaide just stays getting away with murder, literally, and it's very creepy, especially in that last scene where the son is looking at her, knowing full well that he's the only one who really knows that she is a Tether.
And I thought he very poignantly put that mask down, as if almost to say to his mom, I know, and you and I are going to have this barrier between us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Like, the internet is that he might be from one of the tethered as well.
Yeah. So
there's a fan theory along those lines.
Yeah. But I need to ask another question. So, when I mentioned earlier that the film, for me, kind of had this theme of Metropolis, right? So it's just like this beautiful cultured utopia exists, right? And above. And then there's this bleak underworld populated by, mistreated workers below, right? And so I think the second time I watched the film, I kind of kept that in mind. And so, I guess I looked at when the little girl when Red, took Adelaide's existence, right? Took her role. For me, that whole film was just about, these, tethered coming into, escaping this bleak underworld, right? And so if we think about it that way, I wonder, does that, make us think about this? And just because I'm interested in hearing this kind of like point of view from psychologists of how this, if we think about it that way, right? If these are, I know you all keep talking about the Hands Across America at the end, right? And keeping in mind also that Minnie Riperton's song comes in there at the end, right? And I keep thinking about that song. That's a song that I've known for years and years and years, right? Is this, and also the fact that Itsy Bitsy Spider is the song that triggers things, right? And remember, she whistles that at the end also, right? And so it's this moment of almost the slaves, gaining their freedom from this wretched underworld, these workers, right? Gaining their freedom from this underworld, right? So I just wonder, what does that mean? I mean, how does that play into this notion of trauma? And I think that's what I was trying to get to also when I talked about this notion of forgetting, right? I wonder how that also plays into this, right? If we look at those workers as the victims, I mean, can we see them as the victims?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure.
I see Red as a victim. Like, once she started talking and I put it together what had happened, I was like, get it. Just stab her. Take your kids back. But, I mean, that's me.
Well, here's one thing that was interesting. I found watching the second time time, I had an immense amount of sympathy for Red. When I watched it the second time, I didn't. And I know everyone's looking at me strange, but it's like, oh, well, what it was is it's not that I had no sympathy for Red, right? But it was like, I felt like my sympathies for her were complicated by so many other thoughts that it was harder to like, that it just became almost a different feeling altogether. And so it comes down to, okay, she goes in the fun house. Yes, her doppelganger comes over, accosts her, drags her down into this hellscape, and locks her to a bed, right? Uh-huh. But the thing is, ultimately, what happens in that hellscape? They raise her. They don't, you know what I mean? Like they take care of her. They worship her, right? She becomes their leader. And I was thinking to myself, it's like, okay, you get dragged down to see how the other half lives, and this is what you do, right? And so it's not that she deserved anything. It's not that, but it's just, I felt like there was something, in some ways it made Red more interesting. Like, I wanted to know more about what her life was down there. I want to know more about how she was reared, because children do need to learn things, right? And it's interesting because she was reared. She acknowledges that she grew up. She acknowledged that she that she was in a relationship, that she had children. So
the way she describes those things, I do have to interject. You know, it's like what happens. It's, you know, when you have the robot who suddenly, you know, gains some sort of human consciousness. I mean, that's who she was down there. She had a life. She had warm, loving parents. The life that she described down there, you know, she makes that comparison that you got to marry Gabe. I was given Abraham. She knew nothing about this man. That is a relationship does not make. She describes her child being ripped out of her body. She describes, you know, the missing the taste of food, the raspiness in her voice from not being able to interact. I mean, it sounds like a voice that had been, you know, locked. Her consciousness itself had been locked in a box, in a cage for decades. I mean, that she's alive. I mean, I don't know that she necessarily had a life. But I mean, at the same time, she's tortured by that consciousness, knowing that her life has been stolen and that she essentially is a prisoner.
I think there's something so interesting, kind of based on what you guys are both saying in terms of meaning making, with how does she kind of come with this idea of like, this is a test from God and I am from God, and like, it's my responsibility from God to come up and help my people that come up and kind of overtake our tethers. And I do find that interesting, kind of what you were saying to Stanford about her childhood and kind of the way she was reared in that space, is like that mythology and where that came from. Was that something that she took from her time above ground with her parents?
Yeah,
that she then kind of took with her.
A girl, what I got from that, and that did stick out to me the second time as well, that she was probably raised in the church, but any kind of socialization she had ended abruptly. You know, at the age of, you know, how old, maybe 6 or 7 or however old she was. So whatever childlike interpretation she had of scripture and God, I mean, that never really grew. I mean, at that age, you take so much of that so literally.
Yes.
And there is this sort of blind obedience to the word and the lessons that you're taught. But she doesn't have any real life experience. It's God has put me here. This is, you know, my lot in life. It's whether I'm being punished for something, whether, you know, this is a test that's been given to me. I mean, she didn't have the opportunity. I felt really bad for her. She really didn't have the opportunity.
That's all right. You're allowed to.
The more I'm talking about this, I'm like, damn.
That like C-section thing, where she's like, you have to have a C-section. I had to do it myself. I'm like, nope.
See, I
would take over the world over that too. Like,
You know, I experienced all the things you guys are saying about the Adelaide Red dialectic. That's what all I'll call it. And I also think she's sort of a metaphor for becoming woke, for the sort of clinical experience of recognizing how much who you are has cost yourself or others. And, mental health, dare I say, often requires that we not spend a lot of time on that. And when we start to rupture our identity and examine our unconscious, our stuff that we've forgotten or just suppressed, it's very destabilizing. And everything is destabilized in this movie. Her relationship, the family relationship, the culture. So I thought this was a really nice depiction of what it means to become woke at multiple levels. And in this case, it happened simultaneously. And that's why I don't think it's easy to get a clear agency-directed narrative thread on what happened in this movie. Basically, what Jordan Peele has said, I'm going to disrupt everything at every level and put it into motion, and we're going to see what happens. And that I didn't come to that the first time, but I think that's an achievement.
Wait, did I freeze?
Go ahead, man.
Yeah. Who's the real reckoning for in this film? Right? And rather than going with the woke, I just keep thinking, I'm still just caught between these two worlds with this, right? So, I understand the red aspect, I understand the Adelaide aspect, but for me, it's just about this. I keep thinking about the underground people in this, right? Who's really having a reckoning? Who deserves a reckoning in this? So I guess, because I always, when we went to the underground, that's where my heart started aching for them, right? Mm-hmm. And not even just between the two girls, just the people in the underground, right? So, but I also think there's a reckoning. I think Jordan Peele's definitely saying something about our culture above ground also, right?
Absolutely.
We look at, these couples, right? This black middle class couple, but then also that white couple, right? And this extravagance of their living, right? And Cianna, you were talking about, the religious upbringing, right? Mm-hmm. The symbolism of that. Mm-hmm. So is there a reckoning about all of these things, right? Are we, for me, I guess I left thinking, the second time I watched it, I left that film thinking, I guess I was confused about who do I feel for in this, right? Who's suffering the most in this film, right? And, is it, I guess I'll say it this way. I was kind of happy to see the people from the underground holding hands at the end. I was like, yeah, take that shit back. Y'all been treated wrong. Yeah, let's get these people that are living this beautiful life above ground, right? So, I guess I thought about it beyond just Red and Adelaide. What's her name?
Adelaide. They
right?
call her Addie in the film.
Because I guess I just saw it as bigger than the two of them. Mm-hmm. And what does it mean for this these mistreated workers, right? Or these underground, these slaves, right? For them to finally come up, their type of reckoning, right? With the above ground people. Yeah, it was violent, and I might have said I'll just stay below ground and let y'all do all that killing, then I'll come up. But
Right. And I think to tie in these things, something that I had thoughts of, and especially now to hear everybody kind of propose these thoughts, which is why I love doing this, is having so many wonderful opinions and interpretations is part of that reckoning. Even applies even to the U.S. government, who in the movie was responsible for creating the tethers as an experiment, and we're seeing all of this reckoning and this coming out as they're taking back the whole country. If we assume that this happened as their Hands Across America thing, we only see them going across the mountains, but we see this line go on for miles and miles. So if we assume that what Jordan Peele told us in the beginning of how many miles of tunnels are under the entire United States, that this happened simultaneously everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that reckoning moment was the people forgotten by the government who were created for a purpose and then disregarded coming up now and taking back everything. And, yes, it was violent, but to some degree, change doesn't happen without violence. And I wish it were different, but I don't think that it is, because people who have reached the levels of opulence and success and they have forgotten what they built that upon and whose backs that was built upon. And I think this movie did a great job, like Scott was saying, of like thrusting all of that. So like all of these like opinions that everybody is throwing into, like expanding my mind and like looking, I want to go watch the movie again right now just to see like, wow, how many levels and layers were there to this film and how many levels of reckoning happened? Because everybody faces a reckoning in the film. Everyone.
Yeah, remember where flowers come from. Flowers come from under the ground, right? That's the significance of that song at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a line from the song.
Right.
Wait a minute. What is it? Ring all the bells, sing and tell the people that be everywhere that the flower has come. I would sing it for you, but I can't sing it like that.
Oh, come on, man.
The flowers, are coming up from underground, right? Those forgotten people. They're pushing up through the cement. They're pushing up through issues of class.
American democracy is often referred to as the grand experiment. So when I encountered that part of the plot where there were these people underground, I very much experienced that poetically as a metaphor for the American experiment and what it really took, what dare I say, European culture did to indigenous culture, as well as bringing other cultures over here as slaves when it got here. And so the American experiment, I felt that whole thing, we did an experiment, put up in, and when we quit, that's the United States history. We did an experiment. We said we're going to do this thing called individual freedom on a bizarre contradiction called the 3/5 compromise, right? And we do all this, always telling ourselves in a different story about how we're following God's divine plan for the betterment of the human species and all sorts of ridiculous stuff that affords us the ability to not pay attention to the trauma that our quest for purity is generating. And so like I said, when that experiment thing came out, I said, okay, yeah, the American experiment, I get it.
So can I just say, I think this might also go back to a little bit what Stanford was saying about like the science fiction part of it. Like, I don't think the government would I think they would have burned the whole thing down, right? Like, absolutely. So part of me was like, when she was saying, I'm like, is this just what you think happened? Like, you just think that the government cloned people? Because she's saying, here's what I figured out. But like, do we know that that's where they came from? And then also, like, how does that work if you clone them, but they don't have, like, so I think we don't have to go there. But when you talk about like, the U.S. government, I kept thinking, like, yeah, they're the ones that really should be experiencing all this violence. But I don't know. There's a lot of like weird questions there that I guess we're not supposed to ask. But I kept coming back to, and I was like trying to understand that relationship. So I don't know, Stanford, is that what you were talking about when you were like the science fiction has to work?
Well, yeah, because, quite frankly, there's just not enough space for all of them underground. I mean, because think of it like New York. Man. You have to take every skyscraper and have it go as deep as it is tall.
True.
Because most cities do not. Most municipalities do not have enough land mass, or none of the cities have enough land mass for all of its people to be on the ground. Like they depend on people being in buildings.
Not to get in the weeds. I'm just saying the government would have flushed those tunnels and gotten rid of all the evidence. And so I just kind of question if that's really where they came from. I'm just leaving that out there.
No, I have to admit, go ahead.
One thing I thought was kind of interesting, though, is like as we talk about this, if you talk about it as a revolution, what I think is interesting is looking at what all of the tethered did, right? All the tethered, basically all but two of the tethered came up and immediately tried to, as quickly as possible, kill their counterpart, except for two tethereds. And that was Red and Pluto. Remember Pluto was Jason's tether, the young boy, the son? Mm-hmm. They interacted, and you didn't see Pluto trying to kill. He was terrorizing Jason, but he wasn't trying to kill Jason, right? Because remember they had that scene where like they were like when they first are together in that little closet and they're like playing with fire and I thought I'm not sure entirely what to make of it. And I know that there's a fan theory that says that that Pluto and Jason were also like Adelaide and Red, where they had been switched at some point in time. Mm-hmm. And there was a reference to some things that had happened that didn't make sense in terms of Jason's past, but I still thought it was interesting that for every other character, it didn't, and this is why it didn't feel as much like a revolution to me, is that like they were just like, how quickly can I kill my counterpart? Mm-hmm. Like when they walked into the white family's house, it was like
they killed them fast.
Yeah, they weren't sitting around debating anything. It was like, how quickly.
They still had like similar personalities too, which was weird. Like the whole way, like the white dad was like kind of goofy. Like that was all really well done. And then like the white woman like putting on the lipstick and being very like, that whole scene I think was really well done. But I think it's a good point that like their drive was to immediately say there's no room for both of us. It's you or me. So I'm tired of being the one in the ground, so I'm going to take you out. And I think that's.
And then
Go ahead.
Part of it seemed to be when Red had made this comment about how like the tethered and their counterpart shared a soul, and so they didn't have their own soul. So I guess the idea is if you kill your counterpart, then you get a whole soul instead of half a soul.
Yeah, I think it kind of drills upon what is the mythology of the tethered people. Like, what do they believe is true? Like, maybe they do have a mythology that we need to like annihilate our other self to have a full soul or to have one at all.
Or maybe they're just tenants just based on the ramblings of a 7-year-old child.
That's what I was thinking.
Just like she was interpreting her trauma and trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
Just trying to make meaning.
Right.
Yeah, it was the girl
we don't have
who
souls, and that's why we can come up here and kill all of you.
It's the girl whose life had been stolen who persuaded the rest of them to go kill. Right.
Because you're not supposed to run with them. So
right, and she was the only one that could talk, which I always thought was suspicious the whole movie. I'm like, why is Red the only one that can talk? Mm-hmm. All of the others, they had some degree of language capacity, but Red was the only one who had developed actual language, and I found that suspicious. So I'm wondering, how did she start changing the culture that existed with the tethered underground, and at what point did they stop mirroring the actions? Because we see in their story that at certain points they were just mindless drones literally mirroring the actions because their purpose was supposed to be so the government could use them to control the people on the surface, but that failed, and it seemed like it worked intermittently that they were fully mirroring the people on the surface. But then it comes back, and that's where I guess like the science part didn't make sense to me, because Jason and Pluto, he was able to walk him backwards into a fire, and he was literally mirroring his actions.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's why I call it more of a poem, in the sense that my mind was grasping to put a narrative thread on it, and it kept being violated. It kept never being able to satisfy the constraints that Stanford's discussed. And it's like, okay, let go. This is one huge multi-scale poem. This is not a traditional, you can count on the characters being the same person the whole time and trust their narrative. That's the only way first of all, that's the only way I can make sense of it. And second of all, it's the way I ended up appreciating it more.
I appreciate it, but you know me, Scott. I cannot. No, I need rules. I need order. Where did they get all that red fabric to make all?
Where did they get the matching clothes?
The scissors.
Why do all that?
Thousands and thousands of pairs of scissors.
I need answers.
Well, like I want to know how they all have 80s clothing down below when they're showing her kind
Plato's
of
closet.
at the boardwalk going down. Like I would thought it would have been more effective if they're all just not naked. You probably can't put them naked, but like in like ripped apart clothing.
Or maybe they were always wearing those red jumpsuits because those were government issue.
Those are the things that keep me up at night. I don't know.
Devo, man. Devo outfits. Sorry, 80s reference.
I feel like Red had to have made multiple trips to the surface.
That's an interesting idea.
I feel that she was probably watching Addie for a large portion of her life.
Like casing her?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
That does make sense.
because she knew where she lived. She had a whole plan. She's been planning for years. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And she got them all the same sandals she was wearing as a little kid, which I thought was an interesting note.
So you guys are talking as if you've never met your Tether. What the hell?
Listen, they're probably doing a really good job of stalking me and me not noticing. I also get told a lot that I look like people. So maybe my tethered is around and I just haven't encountered them yet. Because I get a lot of, I've seen your face somewhere else. So
there you go.
My tether saw my 1.5-year-old and was like, I'm out. Back in the crowd.
They don't sleep. They don't sleep.
Pandemic. Like, she's eating again.
I think what I found interesting, and I would, if anyone wants to jump in and kind of tackle this, is the idea of him showing in the movie them, more specifically with the white couple, them kind of coming up the tethers and immediately like play acting sort of what they think this life will be. Like Elizabeth Moss's character putting on the lipstick, Tim, the white guy's character putting on the robe and kind of like miming how he thinks he acts, like going on the boat and kind of like tutting around like I'm in charge of this boat now. It was interesting to see them sort of almost like how little kids pretend what they think adults act like, kind of taking on that role. And it also kind of, it definitely reminded me of much younger people. And then also when we're trying something on, instead of knowing who we are, we're trying on something else and thinking that's going to fill us up, which I guess we do kind of see too with Winston Duke's character when he can't also keep talking about the white guy's like, he has a bigger boat and he has a nicer car. And did you see the car he's driving? He got that car just to piss me off. So it's kind of this constant noticing of what other people have and wanting to have that for yourself instead of thinking about what do I want and developing through that, which is also like capitalism.
I totally agree with all of that. Right. Not only is there there's the wealth, there's the scene at the beach where the two wives are talking. Right. And Adelaide just keeps looking at this woman talk about her plastic surgery or whatever. And you can see that this causes a lot of ambivalence in Adelaide, or Red. I don't know who you want to call her, but it's like be or not be. What is this? Is that what upper middle class, and so struggling for this threshold between, what I am and what I could be. And what am I going to need to suppress to be part of this thing we call the American dream? And what am I going to leave behind if I do that? And who am I going to be standing on if I do that? I really thought that, again, I thought that's what the show was doing at like multiple levels, from the individual, the family, group, and culture as well.
But Scott, aren't they kind of reading that project as this notion of beauty and power?
Oh,
right?
God, yes.
That's kind of what I get when the white couple, right, when she's sitting there doing the makeup, right? It's almost like for them that is what America is, right? It's notions of beauty, right, and this notion of power. And I think that's another thing that's happening in there, right? That this is what, because they're above people, that's where a lot of our mindset is, right? That being an American, right, this American dream is about this notion of beauty, right? And this semblance of power, right? This idea of power that we have. That's what I think they're portraying in that scene. I think that's what he's playing with in that scene, is that theme of, and I have to say, again, I relate so much of this film to that song, right? That song came, and I was just like, right, perfect damn song for this film, right? And so, I mean, that's one of the final lines, is this notion of trying to find beauty. If you look within, you find beauty and power, right? And so I think that, we can equate that to that film, right? But that's what, especially with the portrayal of that white couple, even their twin daughters, right? Yeah. That's what their whole life was about, right? This notion of beauty and power, right? We hear Kate Moss's character talking about the work she's had done, right? That's American dream, right? And I think that's what we see a lot of the Tether, like, okay, so now I have to perform this.
Yes.
Or let me perform this to see how that feels.
Yeah. I think we also see, like, to build on that, I think that we see Gabe doing that when they take over their house. When he's going through, like, he's bought his boat, but his boat is not even remotely close to the other guy's boat. And then when they take their house, which is obviously a significant upgrade from the house they were in, he says, I think we're as safe here as we will be anywhere. And that's still like Scott's talking about this layered thing of it. He's seeing that as his come up as to, like, if I come up here and we take there, we're going to be safe here. So we should stay here in this space that now we've assumed, climbing over their dead bodies. So there's this multiple layered effect to this movie that is making my head explode a little bit as we talk about it. Going like, oh, I know Jordan Peele is brilliant, but he is on a level beyond many people. His vision of this movie is fascinating.
I'll just say, I think Jordan Peele's doing a bit of moralizing here. And it's like, why don't y'all just grow up and find a self and stop trying to find it in everyone else. The curse is that we can't, right? I would argue that we discover who we are through our interactions with others. So we are tethered to them, even though particularly in the United States, we create these big badass identities of I'm independent and blah, 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 blah. But you didn't build the roads or the water or the electricity grid that lets you make all that money. But nonetheless, we create this space where you can create and sustain that ridiculously incoherent narrative. And I think Peele's saying, guys, come on, grow up, find something to be yourself and stop always looking over your shoulder or whatever. And whether or not that's possible is different, but I got the impression that's what he was after.
Well, even with like the symbolism of Hands Across America and how they took that symbolism and then blew it out. And then they decided that was going to be our show of strength, and Unity was replicating that is such an interesting idea to what you're speaking to, which is what is the purpose of this gesture? Like, what is this gesture going to move us forward to, and even like with the Hands Across America we actually had in the 80s, like what did that gesture really accomplish? Who did that gesture really feed? Maybe more people than I realize, because I don't know a lot about the history of Hands Across America, but it is that meaning making of, we take something that we attribute to the successful class of people, and then we don't really analyze the effectiveness of it. We just adopt it because we are attaching it to the substance we perceive.
Yeah. Go ahead, Byron.
That's what we do in, America. A lot of, we see in this age, and I think from the 80s on, right, we see the symbolic as the thing that makes change, right? Where it actually doesn't make change, right? Changing policies, changing laws, right? These are the things that make change. Might not make change in people's minds, right? But the whole Hands Across America was this thing, again, of it was this beauty, this beautiful symbol of, see, we can all come together now because we're holding hands across America. So everything is okay now, right? Which really makes that kind of a diabolical turn when the tethered are doing that, right? What does that mean then when they do it, right? Is again, I think, like you said earlier, Scott, that he's making fun. Jordan Peele is definitely making fun of, or making us a statement on, how we in America tend to try to say things are okay, right? We do it symbolic. We do it through symbol, right? We do that in the church, right? We do it in a number of places, right? But that to me, I always thought of Hands Across America as this kind of symbol, the symbolism that didn't really work, right? I mean,
it was performative, right?
A lot of critics and cultural and media critics have really glommed onto that. That the Hands Across America in this film is really just it speaks to the childishness and sort of naivete of our culture, that if we, all hold hands, we can raise, $100 million and we'll end homelessness, just Trump getting elected, how could this happen? Who would have possibly voted for Donald Trump? You know what I mean? And they're never going to build that wall. They're never going to ban immigrants. Those things just don't happen here. I mean, we tend to always excuse that kind of that sort of the ugliest parts of ourselves, with this notion that we are still a country in its infancy. There's just always this perpetual reference to innocence and this childlike quality of Americans and American culture, our love of fantasy, the fantasies that sort of shape our politics. And it's ridiculous. And it was really interesting watching this film against the backdrop of COVID-19, against the backdrop of, the George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter summer. And I do wonder who we will be in 2021 and the years to follow, and whether or not we will continue this forward motion to progress, or will we just sort of fall back once, it starts to get too hard, whether or not we'll just fall back into the comfort of our fantasies of who we are, rather than reckoning and facing, the reality of our nation and our history.
Because we like to forget.
We love to forget.
Well, those who
I thought it was really, really interesting just seeing the tethered standing there.
Yeah.
Sort of waiting. It's such a metaphor for revolution. The blood is, the carrot has been spilt. You won the day, and it's sort of, now what? What happens next?
And who are going to be there tethered in the future, right? I mean,
we all know that's exactly what's about to happen. So
I just say there's more that was fed with Hands Across America than people that didn't have food. There was a whole lot of upper middle class white egos that got fed. And
that sounds accurate.
On the one hand, I say these things and it sounds like I'm trying to say we can just think ourselves out of it. But I really do think that human personality, whatever we call it, is dialectical, in the sense that the things that we see in foreground of who we are only there because of the unconscious background of who we are. And so Jung called it the shadow, right? The things that we don't let the world see, the things we may not even know ourselves. And the irony, the brutally nasty irony of philanthropy in this country is that it's bigger in this country than anywhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. Why the hell do we need to have so much donation in this country? Because we don't have the empathy built into our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Right, and what does it bring to your individualist culture to make philanthropy this big thing? You feed into the cycle of individualism, right? I'm going to give millions and millions of dollars so that kids can be in a building as long as my name's on it forever, mm-hmm. right? I mean, I'm sorry, there are other cultures that just say, the hell with your name. We're going to tax big business and pay for an infrastructure so that kids can learn music without your name on it. We are addicted to this individualism. And as Byron was saying, it's all caught up with power and bizarre notions of beauty that movies like this, they just rupture the hell out of it.
And we totally see that with the protest over the summer. I mean, as great as there were, there was so much performative activism. It was so cringy. Signing a petition and holding up a sign.
My Twitter account was busy as hell.
Okay, you haven't actually done anything.
Right. And
really cute selfies next to a random Black person that you met 5 minutes ago. You're not helping. It's not
going for a jog in your matching jogging outfit, doing
right.
Right. Now, none of that's going to do anything. I think this notion of revolution we see in the film is something I was terrified was going to happen here. And it brought up Trump getting reelected. If he got reelected, I felt like we were on the verge of a reign of terror.
Okay. Are we going to go there?
I'm just going to say that, and we'll pivot away from that.
I think we're still at that possibly at that point, though.
Yeah.
Well, but I also think one thing that's interesting about where we got to at the end is that it kind of falls into the you got what you wanted, now what, right? Mm-hmm. Is that we saw the Tether kill a lot of people, right? But my question is, there were people that the Tether failed to kill, and they were tethered who were killed. So
Right.
what about the people whose tethered didn't make it? What happens next? Because they're riding away in that ambulance, like, oh, everything's fine because we survived and we're escaping to Mexico. Okay. But I just keep thinking, like, what about, like, how do the tethered process if they believe that like they share a soul? How do the tethered process another tethered dying?
Great question.
I mean, I
wondered
think
that
that
myself.
Oh yeah.
I actually
Go
had a
ahead.
weird moment with that, Stanford, because there's that moment where the white woman is looking out the window and she's watching her tethered husband fighting with the other dude, and she starts silently screaming, but then also starts laughing, which was a beautiful scene for acting. So I actually had that same thought about, like, is she upset that her husband is being killed, but then why is she laughing? It was a very weird moment of, oh, look, he's getting shot with a flare gun and he's probably going to die and I'm upset about it, but now I think it's funny. So I think that's a good question about, like, how do they see their own significance, right?
Right.
So, I saw something a little bit different in that. I also thought it was a beautiful acting scene, but we heard the wife say that she hated him.
Oh.
So I'm wondering, like, if the tethered wife also hated him, and in that watching him die, she was also tapping into, well, that's the thing I've wanted my entire life, is to watch his ass burn in a fire and it not be my fault, that I can just watch his ass die and be done with him. And that's kind of how I interpreted that.
Yeah,
scene.
that's a good point. Maybe she was sad about the boat and happy.
That makes more sense.
I mean, I think it's an interesting idea, kind of what you're speaking to, Stanford, of the idea of, like, where do they go from here? Like, what are their sense of functioning? Like, now that they don't have someone that they are acting in conjunction with, like, now that they're independent people, do they really know what to do with that level of independence? And also, do they think they know how to do stuff because they've been mimicking or, kind of like play acting these functioning like populations? And then now that they are independently, how long are they going to stand in that line? And do they think something's going to happen at some point?
And let me add something else to what you just said, Brittany, is, okay, each of them come out, they kill their doppelganger, and then they assume their doppelganger's life, their doppelganger's life, right? That's really cool if you have a boathouse. But what if you're assuming the life of a homeless person, which we saw, right?
Yeah,
right.
And so the question becomes, like in that what if, okay, so things are better, so you get to assume this new thing, but then you're just going to step into a new class differential.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see how quickly they take on the structure of the, I guess, oppressors, how quickly they then come up and just start overtaking that and then fall into their own, kind of what you guys were saying earlier, who will become their tethered.
Right.
Yeah, I think all of us do what the tethered did, all right? In the sense that when we're growing up, we do what other people do. We become who we're around. And it's only when we look into the mirror and reflect on who we are, what we've done consciously, that we have the opportunity to puncture that and dissolve that and become something different. But if we don't, we just become what we watched, what we saw. And I was kind of fine with the way, that it ended, because I'll just stop there. You become what you've seen, and unless you consciously punctuate it, right? And not to talk about what Cianna was talking about earlier about this summer. All of us have to make a choice about how much of the wokeness we saw was what we would call genuine. I argue that's just part of daily life dealing with any human being. Are they genuine or are they trying to play you? But the scale, for me, the scale and the amplitude of the puncturing of cultural awareness I experienced it when there were 800,000 people in DC for the anti-gun protest put on by the Parkland kids. It's an amplitude that I'm hoping isn't going to dissipate, and I hope will be coddled and amplified and nurtured by, dare I say, the incoming administration. We are at a moment that is both a reckoning and a moment of growth, because those two things happen at the same time, right?
Right, and I think we have to face that moment. Oh, go ahead, Cianna. I'm sorry.
Hopefully we have some time to reflect with this new administration coming in on the past 12 months or 4 years. I mean, I feel like personally I've just been reacting to everything. I really haven't had much time with my own thoughts. I haven't had much time to process this. I feel like as a nation, a lot of us have just been reacting to everything that's just been coming out of this administration, everything with the COVID crisis, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to reflect and take a few breaths.
I really hope so. I really do. I hope that that's the path we take, because
I'm really tired.
Me too. I'm really tired too. I'm tired. My clients are tired. We're all full. All the clinicians I know are full and turning people down, because everybody has hit the point that I think brings up what was said earlier about the reign of terror being we're not off the ledge yet with that, of if people continue to exist in this state of desperation and we don't hit this point of reckoning and growth from what we've seen, I think that there's going to be an explosion of violence. And I really hope that as we go through this, we take the opportunity to reflect on how we've all felt, and that we start moving our way to a better, more just future. Mm-hmm. But with that, we're in the interest of time here. I know we kind of wanted to wrap up by 8:45 or so we're coming up on that. Let's take a second and kind of provide our final thoughts on the film, like your reaction to it, whether you liked it or not, whether you want to watch it again. Hannah always has a catchphrase about whether she watched it or not, or whether she hated it and never watched it again. That's the measure.
Hannah's
of
hard to please.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know, Hannah, do you want to start with your final thoughts on this?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. So this was the first time I watched the movie, but when Brittany saw it at the movie theater, she told me the entire movie, because sometimes that happens when she sees the movie without
Hannah
me.
Notoriously didn't watch scary movies, but wanted to know what this movie was about. That's not my fault that you've changed sides about scary movies. I can't be held accountable for anything before then.
That is fair. So I really enjoyed it. I think I definitely want to watch it again. I feel like there's so many different things that I feel like I missed. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a masterful way to penetrate the different identities that we hold and the way that we live our life based on whatever it is we think we are. And I think it was just really interesting. And I will definitely watch this movie again.
Okay.
All right. Who wants to go next?
I can go.
All right.
So for me, I would definitely watch it again, just because I think for me, this film speaks so much to American capitalism and the problems with it, and including notions of class, race. Because in my work, I equate race and capitalism, and class and gender, and all these things intersect for me. And I think Peele does a really great job of making us think about, class in that way where it. I had the thought in my head, and now it's just leaving. I'm so sorry. This is what happens when you turn 38.
But that square value in there, man.
Right. And what I'm trying to say is that it's making me think about these notions of class, right? And I could talk about earlier these notions of beauty and power, right? So, what does that mean for us? Is that dangerous for us? But I also think it's also a film about this notion of American forgetfulness. Right. We were talking just a little earlier about this whole concept of, what happens now as we're moving into a new administration, right? And are we going to have time to breathe? I say that, hey, pretty kitty in the background there. I say that what happens, part of what is going to happen here, and this is the unfortunate part of America, is that we'll forget about these 4 years, right? You know, and all the horrible things that happen to people, right? Just like I think we forget about, you know, I think it's easy for Americans to forget about all the Black folk who have been killed by the police, right? So I think we're just a forgetful culture. And I think one of the things that I like about that film is that it makes me think about this notion of memory and trauma, right? And, you know, how do we grapple with that? And I think Peele does a good job of grappling with this notion of, you know, in any of the work that he does, this kind of psyche, right? And how do we remember, but also how do we forget, right? And I think that's important. I think that's something that happens in American culture over and over again. We forget and we try to rewrite, right? So I mean, we can think about our indigenous people, right? We tend to want to forget that, right? We want to forget these ugly history lessons, right? And so for me, I think that's kind of what the Tether represent. You know, we want to forget. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would watch it again. That's a long way. I would watch it again. Sorry.
I love your thoughts. Thank you so much for providing them and for joining us. Well, who would like to go next?
I can go because I think my kid is about to run into the room and I may have to mute myself. I will definitely watch it again. I only watched it once. It was last night, and my husband is a scaredy cat and kept jumping. So I'm going to watch it again by myself, a little louder. And I think for me, my big takeaway, the one thing that kind of came, it was kind of like what Byron was saying, was what kind of kept coming back to me was the idea that whatever you push down, whatever you oppress, whatever you try to forget, whether it's trauma or people, will always come back. And it will always come back with the same intensity, carrying big ass shears to stab you. So you should probably just deal with it and get help and stop oppressing people and not be assholes.
Very succinct. Absolutely.
I think you and Hannah are probably going to be best friends.
It's hard to follow the mantra of don't be an asshole.
You know, it's amazing how many Americans have a hard time with that one.
You're absolutely right. Byron and I have talked about these things quite a bit. The American penchant for getting is all completely tied in with American capitalism. And the quest for the shiny, the quest for the new, which all means leaving the past behind. And that, of course, buys us a bizarre form of solitude, because then we don't face the trauma that we necessarily impugn on other lives, because what we're doing. For me, this movie is that, but it's also a message about how we do that to ourselves in everyday life, being someone. All of us go to different spaces and talk to different people. And in different spaces, there are different things you don't say. Right? And that ability to suppress certain aspects of yourself in different contexts, for me, that's mental health. That's a sign of extremely sophisticated adult life. And I appreciated him putting that into this movie. I think it draws our attention to where we get our stability from, which is from suppressing aspects of ourselves. That's how we have a stable self. So for me, I will watch this movie again, and to be honest, I'll probably assign it to students, because since it doesn't have a clear narrative plot where you can determine the agency of all the characters, it provides such a great space for just the conversation we've just had. It allows you to explore what individuals suppress, what families suppress, what groups suppress, what cultures suppress, and then of saying suppression sucks. What we come to grips with is suppression is part of the human condition. And then the question is, okay, then how can we create systems of suppression that we can all collectively respect? And for me, and then I'll shut up, this gets us beyond the argument of right and wrong. I think the argument of right and wrong is completely consistent with the 80s and the 90s and the lack of compromise we've seen in American politics since the Reagan era. And that willingness to get into the thickness of life and to the contradictions and negotiate that day to day as a culture and as an individual, it's been suppressed. And so movies like this, for me, bring it to the fore and hopefully allow us to create a culture of not being right. I'm sorry, that's just not my vibe, but a culture of being engaged and open to controversy and discussion. And for me, that is what was supposed to be American democracy.
Thank you, sir. Who would like to provide their next level or their next thought?
I'll definitely watch it again. I'm going on the conversation that we just had. There's so much that I'll be looking for. I mean, one thing that I think one of the overarching themes of this movie is just performance, tied into her dance, the tethered, underground, and just sort of looking at how much of our lives are based on performative action and performative emotion. And also, we didn't touch on this. I wanted to bring it up, but y'all, we would have been here all night. This shield of motherhood, because I remember watching it the first time and really feeling, again, I felt so much for Adelaide, because she was a mother and she so clearly loved her kids, even the tethered when, not Zora, what was her name? I forget her name. When she was hanging from that tree.
Umbre,
and just had these labored breaths. You could see that Addie, wanted to reach out and comfort her, but that shield of motherhood she's still a really, really bad person. And I feel that a lot of people use motherhood as the performance of motherhood as a shield, to protect them from or to mask some pretty horrible shit.
Oh, yep. For sure.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Yep. Thank you so much. I'm really fascinated by those thoughts. All right, so we have Stanford and Brittany left. Yes.
Go ahead, Stanford.
I will watch it again, and I'll watch it again in part because one of the things that JordanPeel did that was interesting was he picked a monster that we haven't really done much with, right? When I say a monster, I mean this notion of the doppelganger, right? The tethered is like a classic doppelganger, and for all of my critiques, what I think is interesting is that he used the doppelganger, and especially by having that switch where it turns out that we've been seeing everything from the perspective of the doppelganger as opposed to the real person. I think that allowed us to have some really good insights into ideas about nature versus nurture. These ideas about, I think it actually allowed us to look at trauma from two different sides. I think what's also interesting is that when you go through this story, so much of the story is about, having a life and having the life that you want, right? And throughout, like pretty much down the line, you get the life by killing. You get the life by killing someone. You kill your doppelganger. You kill your, you know what I mean? It's like it and I thought that element was really interesting, and to have it in this and also against this amoral context of these experiments, in which the experiments are kind of just they're not destroyed. They're literally just left to their own devices. All of that are there's so many interesting concepts that come together, and they're interesting concepts that come together in ways that we don't see a lot, I feel like we're in the age where everybody thinks that we can like do the metaphor of the world by looking at zombies and vampires, and we can turn them all into heroes, and somehow that's gonna give us all of our cultural insights. I thought that what was great about this was the insights came from looking in the mirror.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. I'm very excited to watch this movie again when you guys talk about that. All right, Brittany, you want to go last or should I go last?
I can make it quick. Of course, I really love this movie. I love scary movies and I love thinkers. I could talk about Midsommar until I pass out. And I think I very much appreciate this conversation. It's made me think about the different levels of this movie I haven't even thought of before. So, of course, I'll watch it again. And kind of building on what you were saying, Stanford, I love what's good about the twist is it confronts this binary storytelling we have of there's a hero and there's a villain. And how really what all that means is that the hero is the person who's centered in the story. And that we all think we're heroes in the story we're telling ourselves, and how we sometimes have to confront like the idea of like, are we actually the villain? In this life. And so I think this movie really challenges that idea of just because we're seeing the story from this person's perspective doesn't mean that they are the quote unquote hero of the story. And what do we do when we're confronted with that cognitive dissonance? So I love this movie. It's hella deep. I'll watch it again a bunch of times. And I'm excited that Ben and Hannah finally watch it so we can talk about it even more after this.
Thank you, Brittany. I'm very appreciative of you and your insight and wisdom into making us watch good movies. And Brittany is definitely our most avid movie watcher, and it brings the most into our show for sure with taste and content. So it's always good to have her. For me, I think what I like about this movie is that when watching it, it started to expand my mind, and this conversation with all of you wonderful folks has done even more. And now I want to watch it again, like 10 more times to see what things I missed, because I just watched it like Leandra the first time yesterday. I'd never seen it before. We did an episode on Get Out not too long ago, and I'm looking forward to watch that again too, because from some of the reading I've done, it seems like they're set largely in the same universe and somewhat playing some of the same themes of forgetting and suppressing and who we're stepping on to go ahead. And I very much enjoyed this film and all of the depth and the conversation it creates within your own mind, and the confrontation of your shadow, your actions, and the things that appeal to me as a therapist is that nobody lives a clean life. Nobody. None of us escape our story as the hero without being the villain in someone else's. None of us have ever lived a life where we're not the villain in someone else's story, even if it's a brief interaction. And for us to be able to grow and change, you must be able to confront that and be able to approach yourself and past versions of yourself with compassion and also criticism. And I think that the more that we talk about this movie and the more I hear all of the thoughts of our lovely guests today, is that there's just so much more of that needs to be done. And I absolutely will watch this film again and look forward to doing so. This is reaching the end of our show tonight. I want to take a second and thank Seers of Ardham for joining us here. And if you guys can tell us a little bit about where our listeners could find you, so that if they want to hear more of your absolutely wonderful insight, that they could do so.
I'll go ahead and start. You can find me on Twitter at dark_loops. I also host the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. And I'm on the Department of Psychology webpage at Illinois State University.
You can find me. Okay, I'm going to try to get this correct. I have a problem with it. You can find me.
We're with you, man.
I'm on Facebook. I'm Byron Craig. I'm also on, Twitter at Byron B. Craig, and Instagram at Byron Steve. That's right. And also at ISU. And here's Minnie Ripperton once again. I've been playing this the whole time we've been talking.
My name is Cianna Greaves. You can find me on Twitter at CC Greaves. That's at CICIGREA, V as in Victor, E as in Sam.
And I'm Stanford Carpenter. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter at SW Carpenter.
And I'm Leandra Parris. You can find me on Twitter at Paris Leandra, at PARRIS Leandra.
And you can find us at popcorn_psych on Twitter.
and Popcorn Psychology on Instagram and Facebook. And if you guys liked what you saw today, please take a second and reach out to us on any social media. Reach out to our lovely hosts. Some of our hosts here have multiple levels of talent. I know Stanford has released a comic book. Scott said he hosts multiple shows through his Dark Loops Productions. Please take a second. Our guests are all accomplished in many ways, and everybody deserves to have your attention and take a look at them. So if you like the show today, reach out, let us know. If you want to hear more, let us know. We love to hear your thoughts, your feedbacks, your criticisms, what we got right, what we got wrong. Thank you so much